Welcome back to some more KSP. So, in the previous episode, we had successfully launched our Mun expedition. Same thing that we used for Minmus, although with Jeb not in the pilot seat, we are able to successfully perform the proper mission. And I finally got a, thumbnail image for the series. So, relatively similar to the very famous pale blue dot picture. Anyhow, very profound musings aside, let's go ahead and get this thing landed. So, orbital velocity of 538.7 meters a second, and over 2 kilometers delta V. So, the sort of famous quotes section, well, not quite damn the torpedoes and full speed ahead, but damn the efficiency, get the burn done. I think this episode might be one of those historically referencing episodes. So, because we are orbiting... Okay. One thing I probably should do is... vessel info. Do I have... Okay, so I do have a max acceleration. Settings, maneuver node, altitude adjustment. Okay, so I need to figure out at what point I need to be burning to safely land. So if I have a maximum acceleration of roughly 10 meters a second, and I'm traveling at just under 400 meters a second, then I should burn roughly 40 seconds before impact to land safely, or land softly instead of impacting. So, with that said and done, I need a landing spot. This cratery bit and bits aren't going to be fun. So, let's see, what is my time to... So I'm burning right now, actually. Better to burn early and lose fuel instead of burning late and lose the mission. So of course the downside is the downside of the launch profile, or whatever that happened, is I'm coming around the backside of the moon. So instead of being able to use the moon's rotation to, or not having to fight against the moon's rotation with relative velocities, I have to make up for the several, probably dozen meters a second rotation. That the Mun has, and I need to take that into account when I'm landing. So surface 90. Let's go ahead and execute that. The good news is my designated landing stage has slightly higher thrust-to-weight ratio than my now descent stage. So, first thing I'm going to try to do, and successfully done that, is null out as much of the horizontal surface speed as possible, so I only have to worry about most of the vector. I think it's a vector. Yes, I do in fact believe it is a vector. Unfortunately, I didn't attend my orbital mechanics class. Unfortunately, said class was actually canceled, so I'm just kind of going off what I can remember. That was quite a few years back. Anyway, let's see, altitude 10. So I'm going to be vertical speed. So I realistically need to know the gravitational pull of the Mun in order to safely calculate this. But if I keep my velocity between 50 and 100 meters a second downward, I should have ample time to safely fire the engine at... this actually isn't a good landing site. So I need to tilt slightly. I do not want to land on the edge of the crater. And full throttle. Keep the vertical speed as low as possible, as roughly half of my surface velocity is now horizontal speed. Okay, and kill that rotation. One sort of mistake I think most people make is the difference between speed and velocity. And I myself might actually make the mistake, but velocity is a two-part value. There's a quantity, so 50 meters a second, and in order for it to be a velocity, it has to have a direction. So up, east, whatever. I know there's a proper term for that. Unfortunately, I don't remember it while I'm trying to land. Okay, and that's close enough. Okay, same procedure as before, less than 500 meters altitude. So let's separate stages, and that stage is off to impact. So I now have total delta V required to land of something along the lines of less than 50 meters a second. There's the unrealistic explosion, and here's me not missing my landing. Let's go ahead and flip on the lights. And, of course, landing is a little harder when you don't have... let's not land on this rock, please. Although we now do have a easily accessible sample. or object that can be sampled, right, for science. Okay. And we are successfully landed. Okay, let's pull up the resource monitor real quick. 7 days of snacks and other consumables, and 5-ish hours of light, or power rather. So, with landing successfully performed, let's go ahead and science everything. Material study from Midlands. And temperature data is collected. Okay, let's do a crew report. Let's not override the crew report. Let's take this EVA report. And crew report. That was easy enough. So standard collection of science. Surface sample and oh, this is perfect. You start to say something dramatic about the plight of Kerbal kind in this grand universe, only to be cut off by random radio chatter. The situation is nominal. Probably getting interference from Jeb's bits of research that he left on Minmus. So, I do like to label my sites as the biome that they're in. So, unfortunately, the flag that was hacked for this mission was filled with notes from Jeb. So, he was kind of hoping to be the first one on the Mun. However, he was the first one on Minmus, so was otherwise disqualified from the Mun project. So, this is the Midlands. Not entirely sure what to say about it. It seems relatively flat. Anyway, unfortunately, the promised pizza was a little cold, and with no proper heating apparatus in the capsule, the snacks were a little on the disappointing side. So Richdoc is going to finish up the science quickly, dump that experiment, so you have a copy of it. And after a brief tumble, EVA report, space just above the Midlands. Okay. Let's see, did I remember... That's not operational. Nope, I do need to actually scoop up this science. It'd be embarrassing to accidentally leave that behind in a almost 2-point landing. It would be very embarrassing to accidentally jettison this science. So luckily, the landing gear can double as a small support platform. when that fails, simply use the goo canister. Okay, I was going to say something humorous, but it's the physics hitbox that's messing up. Okay, so remove that data and collect that data. So ideally for future sort of landers, there would be a sort of upper stage that could return, and the lower stage would probably have some sort of a seismic experiment in it for collecting data from deorbiting stages, or not deorbiting, impacting rather, stages. But seeing as how that's not really the case, there's no need to worry about that just yet. So I'll be taking the entire thing back with me. Okay, that was a quick, not even 15 minutes on the Mun. There's definitely a lack of stacks going on. So, with that said and done, let's pitch over to 35. And I have enough delta V to get into orbit. Perfect. So unfortunately, sort of by necessity, the first couple of missions are more or less throwing away the entire vessel. Although I did find that with the Minmus mission, I was able to successfully recover a large part of it. Although due to the sort of time constraints, I wasn't able to pick my landing site all that well. So let's circularize and do that. So 290 meters a second to circularize, and then another probably 180 to 240 to return. So I should actually be able to return with the entire, or just off of the sort of landing stage. And that is good enough. So before things get too out of hand, I'm going to transfer some fuel around. And hope that I don't run out. Actually, I won't run out. What would end up happening is one of the tanks will end up not completely full, or it will become asymmetrically balanced, resulting in one of the engines flaming out before the others, and that tends to be a very bad thing when you're trying to build anything. Luckily, it does appear that I have enough Okay, so I have 43. Okay, so let's turn that engine off and return from Moon go ahead and get this node set up real quick. So 275, let's actually get this a little bit more reasonable. $22 is too deep in the atmosphere. 37, although 37 is just about perfect, as this is a moon return instead of an interplanetary return. That is actually right at perfect. So let's go ahead and execute this next node and see about getting this mission wrapped up. So 8-second burn should be okay, so that was actually calculated with all 4 engines instead of the outboard 3, which is fine. And current, close enough. Okay, and quick warp to transition, and we should be on our way home. Okay, so periapt's 38 kilometers, 39 kilometers. It's actually not bad. Because the orbit is, the orbital period 13 hours 44 minutes and change. Because I have very large excess of life support, I can afford to do the sort of higher is better approach to reentry. So let's go ahead and get this set up. Activate that engine. So slightly higher thrust to weight ratio. The sort of standard procedure that I have for returning with any sort of fuel left, once I get relatively deep inside the atmosphere, I'll go ahead and burn off as much fuel as fast as I can without overheating and exploding the engines. And that helps reduce the thermal stress on all the other parts. And let's see, inclination is a little off, but not that big of a deal. The camera, however, just needs to be turned. So the original landing spot for the Minmus mission was right around here. I'm going to see if I can get the apoapse down to something more reasonable and try to land a little bit closer than the complete opposite side of the planet. It's the Space Center. So it's looking like 3.33 to 3,400 meters a second at periapse, which is in 30 seconds-ish from now. So I can take off the time warp. So, shock heating on the engines, of course, best place to have it. Second best place is the heat shield. Engines, of course, because if the engines burn up, then you still have the heat shield. If the heat shield burns up, then you're in real trouble. So this is a relatively tame reentry. I believe it was in the previous iteration of this series where I was reentering something separated, and I had a very, very nice series of explosions, sort of as everything blossomed out and exploded in the reentry. Of course, the capsule made it back perfectly safe, although I think I did lose one of the parachutes at some point. But all in all, it was a very, very nice light show. Okay, orbital period is down a little bit, and we are going... Where's our altitude? Vertical speed is increasing. Altitude, rather, is increasing. Right, vertical surface speed is decreasing as vertical speed is increasing. And that's still good. Temperature data from upper atmosphere. Already have that one. So the day on Kerbal, or Kerbin, is 6 hours and a couple of minutes, I believe. So with an orbital period of right at almost 2.5 hours, that should put me in a slightly better landing spot. So quick time warp around, and that also should mean that I'm landing on the day side instead of the night side. Okay, another pass at reentry. And of course this one will be a little bit lower in the atmosphere, but also a little bit slower. So some fun shock heating effects. Something I should probably consider if I continue to bring these vehicles back more or less intact is attaching some extra parachutes to the outboard engines, science packages basically, to help with the deceleration. Actually, funny thing about acceleration, the sort of common usage of the term implies an increase of speed. However, acceleration in physics terms is a change of velocity, and because velocity is both an amount as well as a direction, you are technically accelerating if you are going in a circle. Also, you are accelerating if you are slowing down. So there's a fun little science tidbit for the day. And we should be almost out of the atmosphere. So with an orbital period of about an hour, looking top down, here we go, a little bit easier. So Kerbal should rotate about a sixth of its, it should do about a sixth of a rotation. So if this is roughly half, then the sixth should be right about here-ish, which with our periaps here puts us in pretty much an ideal spot for landing, hopefully at the Space Center. So let's go ahead and get everything warping. So even though that is a very rough estimate, the sort of rough and winging it value is periaps at 32 to 35 kilometers, and sort of place that over, there's a spot and you can manually land. So I'm going to bring that down a couple hundred meters, or a couple hundred meters. And go ahead and time accelerate in. So if everything goes according to plan, this does appear to be, I'm going to be a little bit over. So 2,700 meters a second when we hit the atmosphere, or rather start skimming the atmosphere. I'm going to drop this down to 35. Close enough. So, sort of, again, worst case scenario, I end up losing everything up to the heat shield. Realistically, unless something really, really bad happens, I'm not going to lose the capsule, which would be pretty much disastrous. So, now we just have another sort of standard automatic reentry because of, automatic systems. Surprisingly, spaceflight is a bunch of punching in numbers, making sure that everything launches properly, and then just punching in more numbers and waiting. I think most people kind of assume that, oh well, spaceflight's very fun and exciting. Well, not when you've got 6 months between your launch windows and 3 or 4 years between your launch and your mission objective. Realistically, it's a lot of waiting around. So, I think in order to sort of help reduce the waiting around bits, after this I'm going to start to do multiple missions, especially once we get the various space stations in place. That will help with the sort of dull, well, we need to wait for several days while this maneuver comes up, then 3 to 5 minute maneuver node burn, and then waiting around for 6 to 8 weeks while the package travels to its destination. Okay, and actually we're going a little too fast. So, no, actually we're not. Time to periaps is increasing rather rapidly. So at 2100 meters a second, I really wish I knew the distance between this shore and the Space Center. Roughly 2100 meters a second there means that we're going to be covering the distance in about 8 seconds. No, about 20 seconds. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and burn all of our fuel. And actually do burn all of the fuel. There's center engine flame out and outboard engine flame out. So throttle down. So that was actually just the very high atmosphere, so relatively thin. Don't need that. What that does mean, though, is I have quite a bit of atmosphere to actually go through. Although at less than 1200 meters a second, shouldn't be that bad. So it looks like this is going to be a water landing, although we are literally near KSC. That's the flag from one of my earlier missions, and I should run a flag out and place it in the middle of the Space Center. I wonder if shutdown engine. Oh, I'm actually going to be incredibly close. Okay, let's go ahead and turn this. Actually, no, I do have Ferrum installed. So let's go ahead and see if we can sort of pancake this a little bit. So Mach 0.3 something. Nice and slow. So just trying to sort of put the widest part of the vehicle. Deploy shoot, turn that off. Deploy shoot. And where's that? Deploy that shoot also. Surface, point up. And slight separation, but not a huge deal. So unfortunately this is going to be a water landing, which is always a little dodgy. But it's going to be a water landing at 8 meters a second with a relatively wide vehicle. So hopefully not all that dodgy. Anyway, let's go ahead and accelerate down. So we are returning $22.3 million worth of, or million generic units of spacecraft funding. And there's a bunch that broke off. But the good news is we are probably 20 kilometers from the Space Center, so we should get a good recovery value from this. And quick check of memory usage. We're good. Okay, so 1,400, a little over 1,400 science from that. 9.6 kilometers, so even though we did break off a couple of parts, we got back almost 4 times as much as the previous mission. Excellent. And the crew has returned. Go ahead and recover that, and while they're out there fishing up the parts, we can go ahead and do that. So, I am actually going to save the research for the next episode, as I'm at 40 minutes. So, I don't actually think there's anything else that I need to do right now. So, anyway, until next time, this has been Kerbal Space Program. Fly safe.